I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're uncovering the powerful truths behind the Elisha Code and the coming revival. It's a remarkable book written by David Kitz and Dr. Ed Hurd. This groundbreaking book explores a hidden code in the Bible, one that follows Jesus' blueprint for launching the first century church, inspired by the prophetic ministries of Elijah and Elisha. With promises of a double portion of Christ's miraculous anointing, this book is a must-read for anyone seeking spiritual renewal and revival. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below this interview. David, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
Logan, it's a real pleasure to be here with you.
Great having you on the show. I love the book. Let's start out by giving the folks at home an overview of the prophets Elisha and Elijah.
Yes, so Elijah and Elisha were two Old Testament prophets. I call them, you might call the miracle working prophets, as opposed to the literary prophets who, wrote a lot of the Old Testament. So these working prophets, their goal was to turn the nation of Israel back to God. And they were working largely in the northern kingdom of Israel. The country had been divided. So, and they were Elijah was the first of these two, calling the people back to worship Yahweh, God. They had deserted, they had fallen into idolatrous worship. And so that call was made, and Elijah was most famous for this challenge that he put out. Who will you worship? Baal, or and he called together the prophets of Baal or Baal, however you wish to pronounce it, and had them say, if fire will fall from heaven, okay? And so he prayed. Well, he had the prophets of Baal pray first, and of course nothing happened, and then fire fell. That's the most important, story that's well known about Elijah. But he also, at the end of his ministry, there was this transition, or the passing of the mantle, and this is literally what happened as Elijah is carried off on a chariot of fire. The mantle drops to Elisha, and Elisha had prayed or asked for a double portion of Elijah's anointing. And so in Elisha, you say Elisha, and it can be pronounced different ways. In Elisha's ministry, there is double the amount, some scholars would say almost triple the amount of miracle working in comparison to Elijah. So these two prophets are very significant in terms of their miraculous powers, their displays of the power of God, and in calling the people back to worship the Lord.
Let's give the folks at home an overview of the Elijah Code and how it relates to biblical prophecy.
Well, one of the things that struck me, or that's quite startling about this, is the ministry of Elijah. Elijah corresponds in many, many remarkable aspects to the ministry of John the Baptist. And Jesus, later in the Gospel of Matthew, identifies John the Baptist as the Elijah who is to come. So Jesus makes this, which was a prophecy, an Old Testament prophecy, that before, the coming of the Lord, before the coming of the Messiah, this Elijah figure would arrive. And Jesus clearly says, oh, he has arrived. His name is John the Baptist. And he says this after the disciples of John come to him and ask him, are you the one, or should we look for another? And he responds with that response. But he does, when he answers that question, he, are you the one or should we look for another? Rather than saying yes or no, he lists a whole series of miracles, okay, that he has done. And when you look at that list of miracles, they correspond remarkably with the miracles of Elisha in the Old Testament. There's this remarkable similarity, parallelism that the book really lays out. It lays out this parallel pattern between the ministry of Elijah and John the Baptist and the ministry of Elisha and Jesus, because he's the double or more than double anointed one that comes after John the Baptist.
Mm.
So there's this sort of stunning parallelism that I think is the, if you want to call it the discovery or the key to this new outpouring that's happening in the New Testament.
Yeah. Why do you believe this code has been hidden in plain sight for generations?
Well, I think, I like to look at it this way. Okay? We take our Bibles and we read those verses, and we dissect, each word and, parse it so carefully. And it's just like, I've got a background here of leaves. You take that little leaf and you examine that leaf and it's good to look at that leaf. Okay. But when we back on up, we sometimes miss the forest or the beauty of the forest or the whole enormity of it all. And I think that's exactly what's happened here because even in the Gospel of Matthew, which is that transition book from the Old Testament to the New Testament, you see a pattern happening here of Jesus lays out the Sermon on the Mount, well, which corresponds in many ways to the Sinai, giving of the law, and he gives the Beatitudes to us his followers, and then thereafter he does all these miracles. So it's this backing up and looking, oh, what are the patterns here, and what does this look like there, and all of a sudden everything begins to take a new perspective because we see it a bit more from, I would say, a distance that lets us see the pattern or code because he's kind of revealing this. If you break the code or discover the pattern, because that's what codes are all about, it's discovering patterns.
Right.
And you see like, wow, this is something wonderful.
And you feel this can help spark a modern day revival, right?
That's right. And I think it's the whole idea of when we discover truth, when truth is revealed, when we see something in a new way, and this has been historically accurate throughout the church age, is when new truths are revealed. I mean, the truths are there all along in the scriptures, but often they're hidden or their importance is lost over time. Okay. And so when those truths are unearthed again, are revealed again, often revival breaks out. You could go throughout church history and see exactly those sorts of things happening, revival happening, and faith being renewed in God's people.
Tell me about the collaboration working on this book with Ed. What made you guys decide to write it? How did you work together? Did one do the research, the other do the writing, or a combination of both? Tell us about that.
Well, I'm going to say it was kind of, I was the one who was the spark or had the spark to get the whole project going because I kind of stumbled upon this in preparing for a sermon that I was preaching. And I just thought, I just really want to dig deeper into this parallelism that I was seeing between these four figures, really, Elijah, Elisha, and John and Jesus. And but I had also read a book written just recently, at the time there, by Ed Hurd called God's Fire Starters, and where he had little biographical sketches of what I would call revivalists, people who had made a huge impact in their time, um, and 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 so I thought, you know what? This book is about revival. Okay. This is about the revival that Jesus brought in his time, John brought in his time. And it's about revival that we need in our churches, in our lives, in our countries today. So let's look at some of how this has played out historically as well. So Ed does the has done the how would I say the biographical little sketches that apply certain truths that help um, stimulate revival, engender revival, prepare the way for revival, as exemplified by certain individuals through church history.
Great collaboration, because this book is just wonderful. Before we leave you today, uh, tell us what you hope the readers and the folks at home watching take away from this book and this code and this new knowledge.
I think I'm going to maybe mention two things. One is the thought that, yes, revival is possible. I think a lot of people are in this, oh, we're in the end times and things are only going to get worse. And there's sort of a discouragement. There's that sort of, how would I say,
Like
fatalism.
malaise?
Yes,
Yeah.
malaise, fatalism.
Yeah.
We're on a decline. Okay.
Yep.
And so, but I would say God has always worked in and brought about real change during periods of decline. Okay. This is a pattern that has been repeated over history. And so we can have faith that it will happen again. The final thing I'd like to say is that revival that I'm talking about is not going to happen through political power. Okay. And I make that clear in the book. It's not going to come from who we elect. It's going to come from the ground up. It's going to come by real change that happens in real people. And Jesus didn't come to lead some political change. He came to change our hearts and lives. And that's exactly what revival is about. It's starting right here on the personal level. That's where it needs to happen. It's that transformative change that we all need in our lives.
Wonderful. That's a great hopeful note to leave this interview on. The name of the book, folks, is The Elijah Code and the Coming Revival. It's written by David Kitz and Dr. Ed Hurd. It is a groundbreaking book that explores a hidden code in the Bible, one that follows Jesus's blueprint for launching the first century church, inspired by the prophetic ministries of Elijah and Elisha. It is an amazing book. It will renew your faith, and it is highly recommended. David, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
My pleasure. Thank you, Logan.
I appreciate your time. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.